Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Mental Health and Journalism Summit with the self-investigation. Today, it's our second day. We've had some great speakers, some great sessions, and we've got more coming up. The next session is going to be about best practices from around the globe. And before I share my screen, Paola, can you give me the slides? Yeah, just want to say thank you very much to our strategic partners that have made this possible. There's so many people who've been speaking, but also behind the scenes helping out. It's really been a powerful event so far. And just want to say we're on day 2. We've been focusing on solutions today, what's being done. We're coming to the end of the English language part of the day, but there's plenty more in Spanish coming up. And then tomorrow, Mental Health Day, World Mental Health Day, we've got a session on leadership and duty of care, looking ahead, and really trying to share best practice. And so please continue to use the hashtag Mental Health at Journalism Summit 24, MHJS 24, on social media channels. And we also have a pledge, a mental health and journalism pledge, that we ask you to sign up. These are some of the facts that we hope that you can get on board with. We commit to fostering a culture that prioritizes mental health within the journalism community. And I think the fact that so many people have signed up for this summit and are taking part really shows that a lot of people are getting on board with this mental health and journalism movement. We also pledge to support journalists in accessing the resources they need and recognizing that it's a legitimate expense. And then, also saying that this is really about the future of journalism. This is essential to journalism excellence and integrity. So please take a look at that pledge. And just to say, we've got lots more upcoming sessions, as I said. You do need to sign up on this website, mentalhealthjournalismsummit.org. And for each session, you will then need to click on a Zoom button once you've signed up. Apart from these sessions that are going live on YouTube. You need to pre-register also to access the session recordings. So take a look there and please join us for what's coming up, and also take a look back at some of the great sessions that we've already had. So yeah, that brings me to the last session of the English language summit today, and I'd like to welcome Dave Seglins from CBC News and Hannah Storm, who are doing great work in this area of mental health, and invite you to share with us your best practices from around the globe, and looking forward to hearing them myself. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Emma. Again, my name is Dave Seglins. I work with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation out of Toronto. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am a journalist, more than 25 years as an investigative journalist, frontline news journalist. But in the last couple of years, have been working exclusively in a role called the Wellbeing Champion, where I do training and supports around mental health within our news organization and the industry. Hannah?
Hi, everybody. My name's Hannah Storm. I'm based in the United Kingdom, and I'm a journalist, but somebody who came into safety and mental health because I was injured in the line of my work. I ended up with post-traumatic stress disorder and was really kind of passionately aware of the fact that I had a position and I guess a sense of privilege in being able to share my experiences. In doing so, I felt very, very alone in my mental health, but in doing so, I recognized that many other people were in a similar boat to me. And I was able to use that experience to write a book called Mental Health and Wellbeing for Journalists, which came out this year, to connect with fantastic people like Ma, who obviously is behind the self-investigation, and Dave and many other speakers from this summit. So it's a real privilege to be part of this conversation, and really just underlining what Emma said before about the pledges. I'm so, so glad to see this conversation advancing. And hopefully some of the things we're going to share with you today will help that continue and advance further.
So the title of our talk is Fixing Newsrooms, 10 Best Practices from Around the Globe. We have 15 minutes to fix newsrooms around the globe. It's ambitious. And in fact, we would like to point out that, well, we've already introduced ourselves. There's us. We are going to share this slide deck at the end. It has our contact information on it. The reality is, when Hannah and I respectively started our work, we got to meet lots of people from different news organizations, but it is only limited to our experience. And so you'll find a lot of examples from the UK, from Europe, from North America, lots from Canada, because that's where I'm based. But we want to use this opportunity to collect best practices. So not only are we going to share a few examples, and this will not be an exhaustive list, but a few examples of the best practices that we've encountered. But this email address, journalismbestpractice@gmail.com, and we'll share this. We'll put this in the comments. We want to hear from you if there are things throughout that resonate and say, hey, in my country, we're doing this. At my news organization, we're doing this. So this is not only an opportunity for us to highlight a few examples from some areas of best practice that we've noted, but we want to hear from you so that we can collect this and share it back, because this kind of summit is a place where we can pull together our collective knowledge and share it out.
And we hope that by collecting and collating that information, we'll be able to create a much bigger picture for the broader industry, so we can each learn from each other as well. But we've broken it down into 10 areas of best practice. And to start off, number one is research. Unless we have data and documenting situations and we can name things and identify things, then we can't really fix the problem of mental health. Let me just share one thing with you. We know that journalists, by and large, are resilient, but we also know, because of the nature of the work that journalists do, research shows us that journalists have higher rates of anxiety, depression, and PTSD than the average population. The reason we know some of this is there's been fantastic original research, clinically pioneered by people like Professor Anthony Feinstein, who's been speaking at this summit. He's done a range of research across 22 years, 1,100 journalists, 12 sets of data, everything ranging from post-traumatic stress disorder to moral injury in many different countries around the world. Another pioneer in terms of research is the wonderful Professor Alana Newman, who is the research director for the DART Center. Many of you are familiar with the DART Center, and the DART Center has a brilliant database where it collates areas of research as well. And then there are specific country-based, cultural-based surveys and sector studies, such as the one that Dave helped oversee, called the Taking Care Report, based out of Canada. And the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism collectively did a research project with the University of Toronto, Anthony there again, around how the pandemic and the early months of the pandemic had affected journalists' mental health. So quick snapshot there through research. And next one is education. Once we've got the research, we know that journalists, we need education. We need education to raise awareness. We need education to normalize conversations. Different types of education we're referring to here: psychological safety training in newsrooms and journalism schools. In some news organizations, these ideas of psychosocial conversations are integrated into safety training. And in some other ones, such as New York Times, for instance, Agence France Presse, they do proactive mental health training as well. There are other places that do reactive training. So say, for instance, there's a critical incident that happens where people are impacted. So I'll give you an example. During the Bondi shootings, the Bondi massacre in Australia, there was a lot of work done to support Australian journalists after that earlier this year as well. We're talking about experts as well who come into newsrooms, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on from a safety training and psychological perspective. And we're talking also about trauma training. There's some brilliant trauma work that's done by organizations such as JETREG, JETREG, and also the James Foley Foundation I'm very proud to serve as one of the experts on that kind of helping them develop training for journalism schools that have a mental health component in the United States as well. Dave, over to you.
Number 3, Newsroom Protocols. We need to get serious about how we assign trauma stories. And there are all sorts of ways we can approach this through formal risk assessments, psychological risk assessments. a best practice we've developed at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation through consultation with assignment editors and managers and frontline journalists. We ask people before, during, and after a trauma assignment, what kinds of things should we be doing? And everyone agrees we should be asking employees, are you prepared to take on this assignment? Do people have the right to say no? And we came up with an assignment protocol for trauma stories, which we're going to share with you in the comments section, and it'll be shared with the slide deck at the end. But essentially, it's some core questions and core protocols that we are now training up and making sure that we follow during major trauma deployments. We also need to have management of trauma load. I know that organizations like the BBC or AFP, they will have rotations when, and this is common in war zone coverage and conflict zone coverage, instead of having somebody constantly on the beat, changing people out. I know that in the Canadian wildfire coverage, for instance, we have limits on the amount of time that people will spend because we're trying to manage the exposure to trauma. And also another important protocol is a practice advocated by the DART Center, which is debriefing, allowing time and space for people to reflect on and talk about the various elements of trauma coverage as a way to help process, essentially, stressful deployments, be they in a war zone, be they in a natural disaster, be they dealing with difficult subject matter. So those are some of the protocols that we've seen, and we would love to hear from you. Again, in the comments, journalismbestpractice@gmail.com. We're collating, so if you've got protocols or other things that resonate, please send them along. Leadership. By this, we mean a couple of things. It is important that the leaders of news organizations set the expectation and give permission for people to address their mental health as part of their job. We have seen this in various places. For instance, AFP or the Globe and Mail newspaper in Canada. I know CBC here in Canada, we have an editor-in-chief who has given a video address about the importance and the expectation that in our assignment process, we're checking in on people and elevating mental health and making it okay for people to raise their hand if they're not feeling up to a particular kind of assignment. Not only is it about demonstrating expectations, but having leaders who actually role model and aren't afraid to be vulnerable, setting an example, making it okay for their staff to also follow their model. I know ABC in Australia, for instance, has a series of, and it's internal, but they have a lot of their leading correspondents who've done videos that are shared internally talking about mental health on the job, trauma exposure, difficulties. And it's through the sort of leadership of major representatives, very well-known figures, broadcasters, international correspondents, that it cultivates a culture of it being okay for people to address mental health internally. So that role modeling is vital. And then mental health training, whether that's mental health first aid, lots of organizations are doing that. There are also certificate programs for mental health leadership. I'll leave it there around leadership, but you get the idea.
I'm sure you'll appreciate this is a very rapid gallop through 10 best practices. And so there are moments where even I forgot previously what I was supposed to say during the education bit. So I just want to reference back to the experts section in education there. And we're talking about specific organizations that have expertise, such as the DART Center, who you've heard about already, Headlines Network, which I'm very proud to have set up, and I'm the co-director with John Crowley, who I did a session with yesterday, and other organisations such as the Canadian Journalism Forum, Women in Journalism in the UK, who also host events, and some fantastic work being done in Ukraine at the moment by organisations such as 2402 and the National Union of Journalists in Ukraine. And we heard a really powerful session from Lena yesterday on the work being done in Ukraine. This moves us on to specialists, of course, there are 3 different areas in which we feel it's really important to hire specialists. One is where you make it someone's job, and you make it someone's job somebody who is involved in journalism. I give you Dave Seglins as an example there. Dave Seglins, the journalist and wellbeing champion for CBC News. Dave is a journalist, has been a journalist who speaks the language of journalism, and now is there advocating for journalism wellbeing within CBC. Then making it someone's job, somebody who's not a journalist. And I'll give you an example there just in terms of people at Agence France Presse, for instance, has a company doctor. Other places have people who sit between that journalist and something else space. So Dr. Rebecca Whittington at Reach PLC in the UK, an online safety editor. ABC in Australia has a psychologist, has also a social media wellbeing advisor. Different examples there. I'll pull out Reuters as well, Simon Gardner, who's global head of editorial safety, a journalist who's been based in multiple different countries around the world as well. So really the kind of specialist elements there, all of those different areas. And also the final thing I would say is, you know, a lot of the time, back to Dave's point there about leadership, we meet leaders who are made leaders because they're great journalists, but they don't necessarily have management capabilities and management training. And therefore, when we are recruiting for managers and recruiting for leaders, let's make this mental health awareness, this mental health first aid training, or an understanding of how to lead journalists through times of stress. Let's make that part of the job requirement as well.
We have to invest in people. And in the various discussions with people internationally, Natalie Graham of the BBC, I love, did some work on, she helped set up the peer support network currently growing at the BBC. And to help make the case, she cited, number one, other organizations that had peer support, but she went to the accountants, basically, Deloitte, and a study in the UK that found that an investment of £1 reaps a return on investment of approximately £5.30 in savings from absenteeism and sick leave and productivity. And so I think we need to start making an economic argument for mental health within our news organizations. And that's certainly a case where it's been done. I've taken that argument to my own bosses to say, hey, we need to invest in better counseling. We need to invest in better peer support. And here's why. And this is the return on investment, that it's going to affect the bottom line in terms of absenteeism, sick leave, productivity. I'll give you one small case example. This summer, I had the pleasure of visiting Griffin Media and Channel 9 in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, United States, where they have a fairly progressive news leadership, and they have realized that they're having problems with retention, burnout. And so what have they done? They've raised pay. They have made sure that there is trauma training and better mental health supports. And about 6 months to a year into their project, it's set, they've done a bit of an analysis, and they say the increases in pay have meant we're hiring more experienced journalists instead of looking for kids right out of school. They're retaining people longer. They're not losing people to other industries or larger markets. And they're fostering a journalism culture that acknowledges trauma coverage, mental health, protecting people's mental health. So investing is, I mean, it's tough in this environment, obviously, but there is an economic argument to make us healthier and stronger that affects the bottom line. Peer support mentioned. Peer support can be everything from the informal, let's go for drinks, let's go for a coffee, to the kind of support that we have, colleague to colleague through our social media channels, Slack, community interest groups. But formal peer support is really finding a foothold. I mentioned the BBC has a growing peer support network. These are networks of colleagues who they either volunteer or they're nominated. They get some training. They're formally advertised as confidential colleagues that people can go to for support, as a listening ear, to talk about work-related problems. So you can see ABC, Australia, Reuters, CBC, NPR, the Washington Post are all places that have formal networks inside news organizations. And then there are a growing number of peer support networks that are outside of news organizations. Germany, for instance, has a service, an email hotline. I know in Canada, there are photojournalists that get together for a weekly peer support session. And we heard in a presentation earlier today, the National Union of Journalists in the Philippines pulls together a network across media organizations. So that's peer support.
And I just add to that, Dave, as well, the NUJU, so that in Ukraine as well, doing some great work there on peer support for Ukrainian journalists too. Number 8 is well-being benefits. When we enhance people's benefits and when we make people aware of those benefits, because it's no good having them, people don't know about them, then that can be really beneficial. And we're talking about things like enhancing the money that's put into counselling, so the number of sessions that people are entitled to from counselling. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. We're talking about things like, for instance, well-being apps, if they work for people. They may not always work for people, but Headspace, Calm, things like that as well. We're talking about other types of resources and well-being benefits, such as maybe gym membership. There's lots of different things that can be offered. Lots of organizations have those. Some organizations offer 12 or unlimited sessions for counseling, some a lot fewer as well. Often freelancers have very, very few indeed. So as I say, having those benefits in place, promoting and sharing those resources and getting the right people to promote and share those resources as well. And then I think having across the board a holistic culture of safety where people recognize that fundamentally the newsroom is creating a space where people are feeling safe to do their jobs well is super duper important. So this is about the benefit of working in an environment where you're encouraged to do your job well and you feel safe in doing that. And you don't feel like you're the inverted commas problem child because you're not being picked out. Actually, things are proactive rather than reactive as well, which leads us to number 9, which is about specialized counseling for journalists. Many of you may have had the experience I had where I went to seek help at the moment where I felt the absolute worst possible, and the therapist I was given was the wrong therapist for me. And the therapist just simply didn't understand what it was like to be a journalist. They didn't understand what motivated me. They didn't understand effectively the language I spoke. Fortunately, there's a lot of investment now into journalism aware specialists, and we're really, really glad to see that. So there's an organization called the Journalist Trauma Support Network based out of the United States, and other organizations, specialist counseling from CIC based in the UK, which is an employee assistance program which supports specialist counseling, and an organization called the Mindfield, which is quite interesting, which works across the humanitarian and journalism sector as well, really ensuring that the people who speak to journalists, the people who speak with those journalists, understand what it is that motivates us and the kind of experiences we have. And it's great to see that extending outside of the UK and Europe and to other countries as well, but really, really important that we have more investment in that, Dave.
And Hannah, I'm struck because in our plenary for the summit, we heard from Asif Khan from Pakistan and the Deutsche Welle Academy that is offering specialized well-being centers for journalists in Pakistan and have had great success, specifically because they are addressing the needs of journalists through the lens of journalism. So it's far more responsive kind of counseling than just an EAP provider. And lastly, and I hope we'll have time for a question or two, be the change. Ask yourself, what role can I play? We need to normalize conversations around mental health. We need to take action. I don't want to be cynical because this summit is a sign that things are changing. We're having a global conversation for the first time. There is a pledge that is being promoted through the summit. Please take a look at it and sign on. But the cynic in me says corporations are not going to change on their own. It's going to take change makers. So to the extent that you have a power or a position or a role to play in this, I think all of us need to demand better from the industry and figure out what can we do to help be the change, to help motivate a sustainable and healthier approach to mental health on the job. That'd be my message on Be the Change. How about you, Hannah?
I think when I was writing my book, I asked people their motivation for being interested in the mental health conversation. And the majority of people I spoke with said they wanted to be part of this conversation because they didn't want to see other people hurt and injured in the way they had been. That was my motivation to being that. I am a cynic. I'm a journalist. I think cynicism and journalism goes hand in hand, and it's really important to have that. But I do think we could all play a role, exactly. As David said there, I can see the time running out as we speak. So we're just going to move quickly to the last slide, and then we may have a moment to wrap up there.
So those are our 10: research, education, newsroom protocols, leadership, hiring specialists, investment, peer support, benefits, counseling, and getting involved and being the change. If you've got thoughts, please, journalismbestpractice@gmail.com. We're keen to hear them. And I think that's it for our slides.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave. Thanks very much, Hannah. I love the last point, be the change. Dave, I think you saw that there was a question in the chat. Maybe you just want to quickly address that before.
Sure. So the question was, what did they mean at Griffin Media when they said, you know, they're paying more so they no longer hire kids out of school? I maybe in my shortness of trying to say that, I was sounding rather negative on the kids just out of school. What they're finding is that by being able to invest and pay more, they're able to attract more senior journalists. And they believe that, you know, having somebody who's got 3, 4, 5 years of experience that hasn't left the industry, they're getting a better quality of journalism out of it. Maybe that's what I meant to say.
Thanks a lot, Dave. We really don't have that much time for more, but maybe just ask each of you, like, which is your top out of the 10? Which one should we start with?
For me, it's education. For me, it's normalizing that conversation throughout the newsroom to help everyone recognize that we all have reactions to difficult experiences. These are the things we're going to be exposed to as journalists, and it's such a fantastic profession to be part of, but actually creating a space where we all feel safe to be able to share our experiences when we're ready to do so.
I would say 2. I think education is right. Somebody really smart told me, look, this is going to be a culture change in our industry. It's going to take time. And literacy around mental health is really the fundamental thing that is going to shift our approach. So I believe education is the most important. But the one I'm most jazzed about is the newsroom protocols. Getting in and tinkering with how we do our jobs on a daily basis, that we actually incorporate a consideration of mental health and well-being into the decisions we make when we're deploying people. I think it's challenging for the industry that doesn't have enough resources. And what do you do if somebody isn't up to a job? These are challenging conversations, but I think that is where the theory and the goodwill hits the practical. You know, we got to get the work done. And that's really challenging, but really exciting kind of work.
So I'm really sorry we've run out of time. There's another question has just come in, but we're getting lots of messages thanking you so much for your useful presentation. And the conversation's continuing. So we have a networking session that's starting in just 1 minute over on Zoom. So I please urge people to join, be the change with us all. Come and join the networking session. Join in the sessions later on today in Spanish, and come back tomorrow to hear more from our great speakers and all sorts of workshops. So thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you so much, Dave. And yeah, I really appreciated it. Lots of people are finding it very helpful. Thanks
Thank you all.
Thank you.